Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking an absolutely fascinating piece of research by independent researcher John Cantillo. We are going to be exploring a seriously mind-bending question. Why do abrupt changes in our world, the things that seem to happen in the literal blink of an eye, actually turn out to not be sudden at all? It's a deep dive into the very nature of how things develop, how we observe them, and how science actually builds knowledge. I am so excited to share this with you all, so let's jump right in. Okay, think about it. Think about the last time you watched water freeze into ice. 1 minute, it's just sitting there as a liquid, and seemingly the next, bam, it's a solid crystal. Or think about that classic eureka moment, when a genius solution to a really tough problem just pops into your head completely out of thin air. Why do these things happen so suddenly? They feel abrupt, instantaneous even. But as we're about to see, this suddenness, it's actually a massive illusion.
All right, let's dive into this. Cantillo points out that this illusion of abruptness isn't just limited to, say, one specific field of study. It is everywhere. Just think about these highly diverse examples. Over in physics, we've got crystallization. In biology, there's morphogenesis, which is the really rapid appearance of recognizable anatomical structures in an embryo. Out in nature, we see ecological systems that seem perfectly stable for decades, only to undergo rapid, catastrophic regime shifts. And then right in our own minds, we have that sudden scientific discovery or that literal aha moment of inspiration. Despite being governed by totally different underlying mechanisms, they all share this exact same observational structure: long periods of apparent nothingness followed by a sudden drastic transition.
Section 1. The hidden continuous process. So, to really wrap our heads around why this happens, we have to look backstage. Imagine reality as a theater production. When you observe a sudden event, well, that's not the beginning of the play. It's just the moment the heavy velvet curtain finally lifts on a performance that the actors have been rehearsing in the dark for hours. Cantillo introduces a really powerful concept to explain what the actors are doing in the dark. He calls it continuous constraint reorganization. It's a bit of a mouthful, I know, but the core idea here is that nothing is truly sudden. Instead, reality is this constant evolving trajectory. And what exactly is evolving? Constraints. But actually, scratch that. Don't think of constraints just as limitations. Think of them as the scaffolding that makes complex organization possible in the first place. These constraints are constantly reorganizing, progressively channeling interactions, and altering the effective state space. Basically, that just means they change what is practically possible for a system to do next. And this evolution, it is happening continuously in the dark, long before we ever see the results. And this brings us to a really critical realization. Traditional science loves to focus on states and tipping points, right? We like to measure the block of ice, or the fully formed embryo, or the completely collapsed ecosystem. But by exclusively focusing on those observable states, we run a huge risk of obscuring the continuous underlying organizational processes that are happening constantly beneath the surface. An observable state isn't the whole story. It is just a localized, temporary expression of a much longer, continuous trajectory. So the big question is, if everything is continuous, why on earth do we only see it in these sudden bursts? Moving on to Section 2, crossing the accessibility horizon. Now, what's absolutely crucial here is this concept of the accessibility horizon. This is the exact moment that velvet curtain raises, and accessibility horizon defines the specific conditions under which a continuously evolving trajectory finally becomes accessible to us. The really important thing to remember here is that crossing this horizon does not mean the organization itself just suddenly sprang into existence out of nowhere. The organization has been developing all along, it's just that it finally crossed the threshold into our field of view. But accessibility isn't just about scientists squinting through microscopes. There are entirely different regimes of accessibility. There's experimental observation, like our lab equipment finally detecting a physical crystal. There's behavioral manifestation, like a student who has been studying for weeks suddenly demonstrating they've learned a complex new skill. And there's phenomenological awareness, that sudden conscious feeling of inspiration when your brain finally hands you the solution it has been quietly working on subconsciously. Accessibility doesn't characterize the origin of reality itself. It characterizes our relationship to reality. It's just the moment reality says, okay, you can see me now. But as we all know, just because we can see something doesn't mean we actually know what's going on. Which brings us to Section 3, seeing versus understanding. Here's the thing. Cantillo draws a really sharp line between two types of horizons,
On one side, we have the accessibility horizon, which answers the question, what organization can be encountered? And on the other side, we have the explanatory horizon, which answers, what organization can be coherently understood? These are two totally different boundaries. Just because a system crosses into our accessibility horizon, meaning we can observe it, does absolutely not guarantee it crosses our explanatory horizon. Actually, these two horizons almost never advance at the exact same time. This creates what we can call an asynchronous gap. Just think about the history of science for a second. Continental drift was observed decades before the theory of plate tectonics provided a coherent explanation for it. In that case, accessibility completely outpaced explanation. We saw it, sure, but we didn't understand it. Conversely, look at physics. Albert Einstein predicted gravitational waves, and Peter Higgs predicted the Higgs boson decades before we had the technology to actually detect them. In those cases, our explanation outpaced our accessibility. We understood the organization long before the curtain ever raised to let us see it. So, how does science actually operate to bridge this gap between what exists in the dark and what we can finally understand in the light?
Let's look at Section 4, Inferring the Trajectory. And this entire framework brilliantly illustrates the whole shebang. We have, on one hand, the ontological domain. That's organized reality itself. This is that continuous constraint reorganization happening completely independently of us, just constantly churning away in the background. Then, it crosses the accessibility horizon. It passes through that interface and enters the epistemological domain, which is the realm of scientific inquiry. We humans only ever get to interact with this second domain, encountering this accessible organizational state. So what do we actually do with it? We do what's called trajectory inference. Basically, science is fundamentally reconstructive. Because we only ever get a tiny snapshot of the accessible state in the present moment, we kind of have to play detective. Just like evolutionary biologists studying a fossil, or cosmologists looking at background radiation, we use that briefly accessible present state to do two crucial things. First, retrospective reconstruction. We look backward to infer the hidden history and the mechanisms that brought this state into existence. Second, prospective prediction. We look forward to anticipate what this organization makes possible for the future. So, the big takeaway here? When we talk about a major breakthrough or a massive scientific revolution, we aren't talking about a sudden, abrupt shift in the fabric of reality itself. Reality was humming along continuously the whole time. A scientific revolution is actually the sudden, progressive alignment of these three distinct processes. It is the exact moment when the continuous organization of reality, our technological or behavioral accessibility to it, and our theoretical explanation of it, all finally click into place. I want to leave you with a thought today that might just challenge how you view the world around you. We've seen that the sudden emergence of a crystal, a new technology, or a brilliant idea is really just an illusion created by our own horizons of accessibility. So the very next time something sudden or abrupt happens in your own life, maybe it's a sudden success, a sudden failure, or a sudden change of heart, don't just look at the event itself. Ask yourself, how long has this really been developing in the dark? What continuous constraints were shifting beneath the surface before the curtain finally raised? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning what you see.